welcome everyone. Good evening, or good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you're at. We're very excited with today's turnout. I'm very excited about this panel. It's really a very distinguished group of chief audit executives, and we're going to spend the next hour talking to you about chief audit executives as change makers, agents of change, and how important it is in forging a strategy for the future of their organizations. Before we get started, I just want to give each one of our panelists a moment here to introduce themselves further. I know you heard their name and their organization, but I want them to have a chance to connect with you by reiterating that information, anything else they want to share. And we're going to start with Ben. Ben Phillips, please introduce yourself to our audience.
My name's Ben Phillips with PetSmart. PetSmart is a leading pet specialty retailer. We provide goods and services at over 1,650 locations throughout the U.S. and Canada. I have been the chief auditor for PetSmart for around 7 years. I'm a certified public accountant, certified internal auditor, and certified examiner. And at PetSmart, my group has responsibility for operational audits, SOX testing, operational compliance auditing at our store locations, and we also do some third-party due diligence and risk assessment for our third-party manufacturing partners.
Great, thank you. Good to have you with us. Rick Baltz, if you will introduce yourself.
Sure, thanks, Richard. My name is Rick Baltz. As Angela mentioned, I'm the VP of Internal Audit here at Belden. Belden is a publicly traded corporation based in St. Louis, Missouri. We are about $2 billion in revenues, and we manufacture signal transmission solutions for enterprise and industrial environment. As Ben mentioned, my team has similar responsibilities. You know, we cover SOX control, testing, as well as operational ERM. We do some consulting as well across the organization. And I've been in this role and at Belden for a little over 8 years now. And a little known fact, and probably maybe a topic for another webinar at some point, but I actually worked for Enron back in the late 90s and early 2000s. And I also ride a motorcycle. So some strange bedfellows there, but glad to be here, Richard, and thank you very much.
Oh, well, great. Good to have you with us, Rick. And last but certainly not least, my good old friend and colleague, Dominique Vincenti. Dominique?
I'm Dominique Vincenti, and I'm currently the Vice President of Internal Audit at Uber. I'm not sure that I need to spend much time presenting Uber. Hopefully, this is your preferred platform to go places and to get things. I mean, Uber is not that old of a company, but it seems to have already a good name for itself around the world. I have been there for 2.5 years now, managing internal audit. Contrary to Rick, we do not cover SOX as part of the internal audit group. This is masterfully taken care of by another group at Uber called Financial Risk Management Team, which is a second line of defense dedicated to, in particular, the SOX program. As far as I'm concerned, you would say that I am a career internal auditor, trailing slowly but surely towards, I think, my 30th year in the profession. I know time flies when you're having fun, and it gave me definitely the pleasure to work on many occasions with Richard when we were both colleagues at the IAA, or after when Richard had left the IAA and then was a volunteer, and then when he came back to become the president. So it's a real pleasure to be here today. It's a great topic, very dear to my heart, and I'm looking forward to the exchange.
Thank you, Dominique. And again, I'm Richard Chambers. My title with AuditBoard is Senior Internal Audit Advisor. Many of you may know me from my role as President and CEO of the IIA. I finished that role up in March of this year after 12 years. Prior to that, I was with PwC and then did a career in government audit early on. Let's turn to our panel and let's start to explore some questions with the three panelists that have joined me today, and we'll get started. The first question that I want to throw out there, and I'm going to ask I'm going to ask our panelists to respond, and I'll probably change the order of responses as we go through these questions. But as a chief audit executive, how do you bring strategic vision to the function of your organization? To being a chief audit executive, how do you bring strategic vision, Dominique?
If we need to go into the sausage making, let me go right into it. Taking the most recent examples of when I arrived at Uber, taking a strategic approach to the functions meant to take the time, although things have to go fairly fast at Uber, but at least to take the time with the team to set back, understand where we were coming from and where we were at the point where I joined. Take the time to understand where the company was at and where the company was going. And then making sure that we had absolute clarity on, first of all, understanding what our mission was and is as it relates to our role within the entirety of the Uber world, to set a vision for what we wanted to be in the future, because the company was changing and we knew it was changing, and we had a good insights on the how and where it was changing. And so understanding a mission, we got some point of clarity of how we needed ourselves to evolve and what our vision for the future needed to be. And then I'm not going to go into the details, but once that was very, very clear, we could set a strategy which would allow us to go from that point A, which was that moment in time, to point B, which is what that point in the future was for us. And behind that strategic directions, develop, plans to go and deliver on that journey. So that's, in a nutshell, and to be very practical, how one could be strategic in managing its functions.
Great. Thanks for that insight. Ben, what about you? What do you, how do you as a chief audit executive bring strategic vision to your organization?
Yeah, thanks, Richard. I think, to echo what you said earlier and what Dominique just said, I think the first step is for internal audit to really understand the organization's strategy so that it can align. And I think maybe a lot of newer auditors may not take the time to do that. They want to run a playbook of audit that they're familiar with. So at PetSmart, our executive team has outlined a series of initiatives that we call our long-range plan, which is kind of a 3 to 5 year look into the future. And it really at a high level describes where we want to place bets to succeed. For example, we know we want to significantly improve our customers' omni-channel experiences. But I think importantly, it also shows where we're not going to compete. Like, maybe not a surprise, we're not going to try to match an Amazon.com on assortment and price. That's a recipe for some stiff competition. So these plans translate to business objectives for the next 1 to 2 years. And internal audit, we use these objectives in our planning and risk assessment processes. And once we have an understanding of where our business is going to focus its investment and where we want to innovate, we can tailor our assurance and consulting work to support those objectives. And so, in this area, our efforts extend well beyond traditional kind of risk and control-based work. And we seek to provide, insightful and reliable analysis of all this business information that can really support our decisions. So we really want to be part of that effort to innovate and drive positive change at PetSmart.
Thanks. Great insights. And then, Rick, what about you? How do you bring strategic vision to your role?
Sure. So I'll go back to 2013 when I joined, or actually was thinking about joining Belden. A lot of the conversation I had was sort of gaining an understanding of what the expectation was from the C-suite as well as the audit committee as to what they wanted internal audit to look like. And during those conversations, sharing sort of my thoughts and ideas around, what a strategic internal audit function looks like, to get away, not that there's some tactical things that they have to happen, but to forge a future vision for what internal audit needed to look like at Belden. And I will tell you, From the time I joined here in 2013 to as we sit here in 2021, the internal audit function here at Belden looks very different. We've implemented new tools to support the work we do. We've implemented data analytics. We've added resources in areas that we did not have in the past, specifically around IT activities, SAP knowledge, those sorts of things. And in addition to laying out the strategy and understanding how internal audit dovetails into where the company is going. So like Ben mentioned, we put a 3-year strategic plan together here at Belden. I coordinate the ERM process, which dovetails very nicely into our strategic plan process. So that makes it much easier for me as the leader of the internal audit function to make sure that we are aligned with where the corporation is going over the next 3 years, whether it be supporting mergers and acquisitions, divestitures, and those sorts of things. Additionally, I think the other aspect of that is being relationship centric. You mentioned some of those attributes early on, Richard. In building that relationship with the audit committee, your stakeholders, and being, having a seat at the table. I sit on various committees within the financial leadership team. I have, sessions with the CEO and the CFO. CFO on a weekly basis, CEO at least on a quarterly basis, if not more often. I have those private sessions with the audit committee chairman to make sure that we're aligned from expectations and where I see things and we move forward over the next couple of years and put those things into action.
Thanks. Great insight. You made a point there, I think, that I picked up throughout the responses, and that is that, if you're bringing a strategic mindset to the role of internal audit, the function is not going to look the same over time. It's going to continually evolve. It's going to continue to change to align with stakeholder expectations, and then to, as we get to this next question, to align with the strategy of your company. So this question really for each of you, and we'll toss it one at a time, is how closely aligned is internal audit with your company's overarching strategy? And I might add, just how do you make sure that you stay aligned or attuned to the company's strategy and your role? And we're gonna start with Ben on this one. So why don't you tell us what you think in terms of that question?
Sure, thanks, Richard. I'd say that at a PetSmart, internal audit is very closely aligned with the overarching strategy. I think a lot of the traditional work of internal audit, internal control testing, and operational types of assurance work are really table stakes. That's the bare minimum that an internal audit function needs to deliver. But I don't think it's going to be delivering sufficient value to support a well-resourced internal audit function that can really act as a change agent. So I think internal audit needs to understand the organization's plans to grow and prosper, what the strategy is, and make sure that we're delivering assurance and consulting work against those projects. So as Rick just mentioned, there's numerous opportunities to align with the executive leadership, with the audit committee and the directors of the company to make sure that we're at the right projects at the right time, whether it's a pre-implementation review, controls assessment, or other kind of work that supports what the company's doing today.
Dominique, if I think of the companies represented here, and if I think of companies, period, Uber's one that has just been evolving almost at the speed of light, growing, changing. You guys are now delivering food. You're into all kinds of things. So how do you do that? How do you stay aligned as the chief audit executive with the company's strategy, which is probably a moving target, I would think?
Absolutely. And that's, talking about an area where with my team, we are continuously evolving, which is, being able to have a good understanding of what's going on in that damn business almost on a daily basis. It is where we are trying to challenge ourselves in our own kind of processes and ways of gathering the right business intelligence at the right time so that we can be tuned. Uber is changing almost on a daily basis. And because we want our work to be fully aligned with what matters at any point in time. And when we say what matters is that what is likely to have the biggest impact on the value of the enterprise. It is super important for us to understand exactly what's going on, where the enterprise is going, what are the key strategic decisions that are being made at any point in time, and especially all the pivoting that is happening on a constant basis. So this quarterly risk refresh actually is not just we do that once a quarter and then we don't go back to it. This is the pinnacle moment of efforts that are happening every day throughout the internal audit team, organized around what we call our thought leadership pods, where my entire management team and all the members of the team are in contact, I want to say almost on a daily basis, with all the leadership in the company, both centrally at headquarters, but also in regions, across our lines of business, across our functions, across our key capabilities, to constantly gather and understand what they're doing, what they're deciding, where they're going, and how all of this is connected. And then they basically digest this information on an ongoing basis, collect it, analyze it, and then we come once a quarter to consolidate everything and then step back a little and try to understand, do we have now a complete view, which is both consolidated, granular, precise, and with all the necessary nuances. And we never stop doing that. So that's the cost we have to pay to stay in line with, as I said, a company that evolves at a very, very fast pace. And that can spin off a business that is going to be $0 today, but $10 billion tomorrow, within 3 months in a particular corner of the world.
Good insights. Yeah, Uber is just a fascinating company, I think, for a lot of us to watch. Rick, you touched on your last answer on something that I think may be really pivotal to this particular question, and that is you sort of alluded to the fact that you have that seat at the table with other executives. And how important is that, do you think, in helping to stay aligned with the company's overarching strategy?
Yeah, Richard, I think it's, at least for me, it's critical. Because I feel like I am informed and know exactly where the company's going from a strategy perspective, also just from a day-to-day perspective in terms of, what acquisitions, what divestitures, what new revenue solutions we might be coming up with as we move forward through a given year or a strat plan session. Here at Belden, strategy and alignment across the entire organization is critically important, and we actually have what we call a strategic deployment process, where the CEO lays out his objectives and goals for the corporation for the near term and the long term. And then that cascades down to every function within the organization, including my internal audit team. And so we, on a monthly basis, along with the other financial leadership team, talk about where we are relative to those objectives and goals, and how that is continuing to align with what our CEO has set forth as the objectives for the overall corporation. So, I feel fortunate that that's ingrained in the organization, which makes it a lot easier for me to make sure that my team and function is very closely aligned with where the organization is going.
And we're going to come back now to our panel and what I think may be the most important question that we're going to ask them today, and that is, what is the one key strategy that you would recommend internal audit teams adopt in order to future-proof their function? And we're gonna come back, and I'm gonna start this one off again with Dominique. Dominique, what is that one key strategy that you'd recommend to future-proof an internal audit function?
One piece of advice, going back to some of the things that you've said, Richard, and as well as Ben and Rick, is go back to the strategy of the company and aligned with the senior leadership and the board about what matters, and engage and share your view of how internal audit is going to have an impact on what matters, so that when few months down the line, you go back and ask the CEO, am I strategic, or is my function strategic and supporting the good governance of the company in the achievements of its long-term value creation? You'll have a CEO that says, yes, you're on the same ship as we are, and you're helping us to steer the ship in the right direction, the right way, and keeping us in check with what we committed to accomplish. So that would be my one piece of advice.
So, Richard, when I think of future-proof, I think of sustaining the function and not getting to the point where the C-suite or the audit committee is saying, well, why are we expending these funds on this function when we're not sure what value they're bringing? And so my one piece of advice is make sure you build those relationships at the audit committee level, the C level, the business unit level, and be able to succinctly describe sort of what the vision is for internal audit and how internal audit is aligning with the corporation in achieving its objectives and goals over the next 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. And I think if you do that, and then, bringing that vision to the function itself and the team, so that you're bringing in the right resources to be able to sort of support that vision and continue to change, I think is critical to future-proof any function, let alone being internal audit.
Ben, what are your thoughts? If I think about, the point that, if we think about what it takes to future-proof, what you want to do is really mitigate risks that something could happen that makes your organization ineffective at some point or somehow undermines your success. So if I think about it from that standpoint, that what would you recommend to help an internal audit department minimize risks to its own success in the future? What would you say?
Yes, I would say that, in my experience, organizations today are increasingly looking to increase productivity and innovation with new tools and technologies that they may not be familiar with. So new practice areas like advanced analytics, process automation, artificial intelligence. So as far as future-proofing internal audit, I think we need to be seriously focused on upskilling our teams so that we can gain facility with these technologies like automation and analytics. If we're successful in this area, we can help both our internal audit teams and our internal customers perform their work more efficiently. So the more time we can save by automating, for example, routine and repetitive tasks, that time's freed up for doing analysis, doing risk assessment, interpreting information, so we can ultimately provide greater assurance and greater value to the company with fewer audit resources.
And I think we've got just enough time for kind of a quick round the horn response here. We've all come through a very, very challenging year and a half. I don't think there's anyone in the world who hasn't been impacted in the last 18 months by the COVID-19 pandemic. So my question to each of you, and I'll just go around and ask you each, is what was the one thing that you learned about yourself as an internal audit leader in these 18 months that you might not have realized before? I realize this is a little deeper question, but I thought it might be a good way for us to go out, and I would ask the audience to think about that for themselves. So I'm going to start with you, Rick. What's the one thing you learned about yourself as an internal audit leader during the COVID-19 pandemic that sort of surprised you about yourself?
I think, Richard, as I think back, and sometimes I like to say rather lucky than smart, but I had undertaken a few years ago the path and the vision to automate a lot of the processes that we had that would support a remote learning environment. Obviously, one of those tools, we're here with AuditBoard today, but I began to use as a team AuditBoard 3 years ago, which very significantly helped us as we had to work in a remote environment. And my team, I didn't explain early on, but my team is located around the world. So they're in different time zones, 14 hours difference in Asia. And that tool, and I think that undertaking a few years ago really got us through this pivot that we had to go from being on site at locations to having to do this work remotely.
Good insight. Dominique, what about you? What's the thing you learned about yourself in these 18 months or so that surprised you as a leader?
I don't know if it's something that I've learned, but it came as a massive confirmation, needed massive reinforcements going forward. At the end of the day, we can talk about strategy, data analytics, techniques, tools, and methodologies. But fundamentally, what the past 18 months have helped us hopefully realize, if it was not realized before, is we are fundamentally in a human business. It's a human-based business. And we've always talked about the importance of EQ, but we more often talk about our IQ. And again, as I said, the tools and techniques and smartness that we put into the work that we do. But how do you keep a team together? How do you stay connected to your stakeholders, your customers, and how do you still give a sense of community, of doing something together, of accomplishing goals and objectives with and through people, was definitely the past 18 months has been a big lesson of investing more than ever in our human base part of the business. So I would summarize this by one word: empathy. We've talked a lot about strategy. If there was two things I would advise the audience to think about going forward as two particular quality that they need to have as leaders: strategic thinking and empathy.
I think that's an excellent point. And I stress all the time that we audit people too. And that empathy is such an important and underrated attribute for internal auditors. Ben, what about you?
Yeah, I know we're short on time. I think the one takeaway I've had is that I've got tremendous amount of faith in my team and their abilities and their professional capabilities. And as we faced a crisis in the last 18 months, I found myself relying on business relationships throughout our organization to identify opportunities where my capable team can add value to the business and continue either internal audit operations or in some case company operations in a crisis to contribute. And I think I've been successful at helping our leaders see the value there and making sure that our team stays plugged in. So I'm really proud of the way they came through the pandemic and the way that internal audit has demonstrated that we're dedicated to the company's mission and the business.
Thanks. I want to let me answer that question for myself. I guess for me, it was a reaffirmation that you're never too old to change or learn. I might have been at a place in my career where I could have just sort of stayed put and enjoyed the fruits of all the years of labor that I put in. But I kind of got out there during the pandemic, walking, getting exercise, thinking, you know what, I want to try and do something different in the future. So for me, it was that there's still opportunity to grow and learn. And I think a lot of people learned that about themselves in the last 18 months. So thank each of you for being here today. Thank our audience for being here. Thanks, everybody.